Thank you.
My name's Mike Hertzfeld. Talk about stereotypical. I get stereotyped by just the name in general, but just to answer the young man's question that's here in the front in reference to, what's the roadmap as to we go forward. I was fortunate enough, I've been in Delaware all my life, and I was fortunate enough to grow up in Belvedere, if anybody's familiar with that, it's a black community. And then also subsequently moved to Brookmont, which was another black community, black and white mixed, and then ultimately ended up in the city on the west side. And as I look at the roadmaps of what was done right, because growing up in a community like Belvedere, where a good kid would talk to an officer and tell them about the bad kid, that gap doesn't seem to be, it seems to be that's the gap now where you don't have anybody talking from that standpoint. Knowing our community officers growing up, that was one of the most important things. As I moved communities, I've seen that didn't occur, whether it was Brookmont, whether it was the west side. When you look at the roadmap, as you said, now I live in Middletown. And in Middletown, in the community that I live in now, it's not incumbent for us, and I noticed, we don't call the police. If there's somebody at the pond, which I think everybody knows in this state, we're facing a heroin epidemic, and it has no color. I mean, it's everywhere. Well, we have a pond in our neighborhood that people like to come into and shoot drugs. Well, not only me, not only my wife, not only my neighbor, we all address it, whether it's going around the pond, blowing the horn, whatever, before we call the police, and then calling the police, letting them know, hey, yesterday we had this, could you guys look out for that? We understand you're busy, but it's incumbent upon the roadmap for you in your own community and everybody in here when you leave here is to go back and look at what you're doing to help the police do their job. Because ultimately, none of us in here want to call the police for any reason. I mean, ultimately they got jobs to do, I get that, but ultimately none of us want to have a negative interaction or any interaction in general with the police if we don't have to from that standpoint. But I think if we look at what we are all doing within the communities that we live in, personally, and not necessarily putting yourself in harm's way, there's different things that you can do to move forward, and as well as talking to your neighbors and addressing it that way, it's going to ultimately make your community better. The community I live in, they do that. I mean, no different than, somebody who has something that's not supposed to be in their driveway, so on and so forth. So when you talk about what was the roadmap, I saw that roadmap when I grew up and I lived in Belvedere because everybody in Belvedere knew everybody, and back in the 70s, not that I'm aging myself, but back in the 70s, you could be disciplined by anybody in the community. It didn't matter whether it was your mother or father. And we've gone away from that just because of just attrition and moving on and moving forward. But I think when you look at some of the communities that are outside of some of the different areas and you say, well, what's their roadmap? How come this community in Middletown is doing well, but then my community in Wilmington is not? What are the people actually doing? Not the police.
Right.
Right? It's about the people. It's not the police at the end of the day. And I think all of us, if we could leave this meeting and say, man, the police are our answer, they're not. I don't want them to be. Not in my life. I want to be the answer and look at what I'm doing from that standpoint. Right? And if I can't do anything, then, I need to move to another community if I can. If I can't, then everybody here, you got to get involved.
Right.
You got to get involved. If you are not involved when you leave this meeting and you take nothing else from this meeting, you're not involved and you don't want to change your community or your situation. But the answer is not the police. They're not the answer. They're just an assist. That's all they are. They're just an assist from that standpoint. When you get to that point where you can't go any further and you've done everything you can, then you should be utilizing the police from the standpoint of, not only am I telling you about it, but what's your idea? What do you think I should be doing as a community member because I've tried this, and this, and it doesn't seem to be working. And if the officer who comes out doesn't have the answer for you, let me tell you something, folks, there's more than one cop. Right? Work your way up. Do what you got to do, but it just doesn't stop. You just can't throw your hands up and say, I want my community to be different tomorrow. Right? And I'm going to address one other thing. When we look at racism, I think racism goes along with classism. And I think everybody in this room can agree with that. I still have family members in Wilmington, Belvedere, everywhere. And I think what you sometimes see is a classism more so than a racism, and you have to recognize the two. Classism is a media that shows you that constantly black folks are getting arrested, right? But it doesn't show you that white folks are getting arrested too. Because any of you, if you go up to Dawsonville, I guarantee you, they're getting arrested left and right. They're riding motorcycles just like they're riding through the city of Wilmington. And they're getting locked up just like everybody else. But you might not see them because that's what the media and your social media doesn't present to you, because it doesn't sell from that standpoint. But they're getting just as much as locked up as everybody else. I work in the Newcastle County Courthouse. And any of you, come up there and just come through and sit and watch what's coming through the Newcastle County Courthouse. You're not going to see more black folks than you do white folks. In the sense of everything in a totality that goes on, right? Not just arrests, but just other things, other people being sued, all that. You're not going to see it because within that environment, and Delaware in general, we're a small piece. We're 20%, but we get viewed 80% of the time. And I can tell you now, from a law enforcement standpoint, does everybody have bad apples? Everybody here can name a bad apple in their community. Everybody in the police department can name a bad apple within the police department. But I guarantee you, you're going to see that bad apple 90% of the time, just like you do in your community. Dunleaf is not a bad area at all. It's a great area. But you got one or two bad apples, and do you think that I should judge you based on that one bad apple? But police officers get judged based on the one bad apple. So again, we have to look at it and make it incumbent upon all of us as we leave this room, even with children, moving forward, is that we tell our children that, hey, everybody can have one bad apple. It's how you move forward and how you deal with that bad apple that results in a positive outcome. The young man that was up here, the police stopped him. They asked him his information, his ID. How he proceeded dictated whether or not he ended up getting arrested. He stayed professional, explained who he was, so on and so forth. And you know what? They moved on. But how many times do we not do that? How many times do we see that on video where we don't do that and it escalates to something else? I have an 18-year-old black male son. Do I worry about if he goes out and something going to happen to him? I'll tell you no. You know why? Because I teach him. Remain professional no matter what. We can deal with anything as long as you don't come out of who you are. Right? I'll deal with it. Dad will deal with it when you get home. Mom will deal with it when you get home. More so mom than dad. But, and my wife's from Trenton, New Jersey, so trust me when I tell you, more so mom than dad. But, again, if his actions dictate, if his actions are negative, then he's going to get negative. If his actions remain positive, he may get negative, but we can deal with the positive moving forward, right? And I think it's incumbent upon all of us, not just our kids' friends, our kids' cousins, whatever. Everybody in this room. Everybody might know somebody who's bad. Say something to them. You know, there's a big thing that's going through the United States now and through policing and everywhere is see something, say something, right? Because we were all on the same side the minute the terror bomb hit New York. Everybody was best friends with everybody, right? We're all Americans. Well, we got to keep that thing going. In order to keep that going is, if you know that your son's friend is doing something wrong, see something, say something. Don't wait for the cops. And then if the cops do get there, then help them. How many times do the cops constantly say that the victims didn't cooperate and they're shot sitting in the hospital? Well, how about the parents? How about the cousins? How about the friends? How about the good kids in the neighborhood? Because everybody knows the story of everybody within your community. So last, the only thing I had to say is moving forward, just make sure that if you leave this meeting, the next step forward, if anybody's looking for it, is get involved. Do something. Right. Do something. But just don't depend on the police.
Thanks. So ultimately, if I could interject, the police are part of our community. They're not separate, right? Like they said, hey, take this off. When we go to work, who wears a suit, this, we're going to work. If you're poor performance at work, they're going to address that at your department. I think ultimately, if we look at when something's wrong in your house, you figure out, well, what do I got to do to fix this? If it's someone that's not doing what they're supposed to do, address that. If it's the police officers, how do you address it? Do you go to the truth? And if you don't get the answer, what else do you do? So not that I am saying that I'm not that person. But I think ultimately what we end up doing is saying, they're not doing their job, they're not this, it's us and it's them. And then they go to work and they're like, well, if it's us and them, what do we gotta do, right? Because at the end of the day, just like if you're on your favorite sports team or you're at work, we start to get insular, like, hey, this thing is it's about us, because all the questions are being fired at them, and it's like, whoa, if I take this off and I didn't have this on, I was sitting here, who would you be talking to? Talking about growing up in the inner city, I grew up in the South Bronx. And answering to your point as far as how do we fix it, right? I walk that block every day with my friends that I went to school with, selling drugs and this, right? And I stood in that corner one day and was like, yep, this is what I'm gonna do. Because it was cool. Until one day, I'm like, why? So I asked myself, why? Right? Why is this something that I'm like, yes, this is what I wanna do? And I said, well, the answer was, because I don't know, right? Because I didn't know. Thanks. Because I didn't know that there was something else to do, right? And it was my need to fit in to the stuff that's cool. Because as a child growing up, part of peer pressure is when you step out and you've got to say, hey, I'm the guy, the outlier, and I'm gonna go down this road, and this road seems to be, you're a punk, you're a this, you're a that. The only people I have on my side are the people everyone else doesn't want to be a part of. So now I can't go and say, well, I'm associated with the folks that are the police officers because most of my friends, this and that, they're going through that. My experience is that same corner you talked about, 15 years, one of the kids from the community ended up becoming a cop and saying, because I want to go change that. And now that block's 30 years and still hasn't changed, right? Because he went in and realized, like, bro, I can't fix it. It's not me. The police can come up every hour. Well, we figured it out. Well, it's 8 o'clock. They're going to be here leaving. No drugs. Nothing's going on at 8 o'clock. And then everyone in the community said, well, how can't they fix it? They can't fix it because we've got to take some accountability and say, well, if the police are going to work and I know that person is doing something, how do I come approach that person and say, this is not a good thing? When that happens is when your mom or your sister or your brother is passing that place and something happens to them. And then we say, you know what, I should have done something years ago or this ago. And then it gets to the point where you're fed up because something actually happened to someone you care about. Folks are marching today because an incident happened that they said, you know what, we're fed up. Gun issue's been, they had guns, it's been an issue, right? It's always been an issue, but we always wait for something to be painful enough to get our rocks off and get ourselves to say, yep, I'm here and I'm on my soapbox and I'm talking, right? I guess part of that, I'm doing that also, but I'm coming from a point of realizing that I had an opportunity one day and I thought that police officers were not part of the community. I just, for some reason, it was naive of me that they came from somewhere else. But I knew that you guys didn't. And then realized that that relationship became adversarial because we made it that way, right? We made it that way. And the folks that, like my good friend that wanted to be a police officer, I specifically asked them, for what? Right? Like, why do you want to be a police officer? For what? Because I think I want to do good. They don't do good because part of the addressing was my experience of realizing that yes, they don't do good because I'm looking at it from the lenses of the people they don't do good with, right? And the people they don't do good with are the people who are doing bad things. Whether I want to believe that or not, or we all want to, I'm not here to say we're all going to agree, but what I do know is that every single day, just as you get up and you have to go to work, men and women, they all have to go to work, right? The best time you want to see police is when you're in trouble and you need help. We don't complain, we don't talk about them, we don't do none of that, right? Not saying that
That's our goal,